In the dead of night, a chilling knock echoed through the empty house. The silence that had nestled comfortably in the corners was suddenly shattered. The echoes of the knock reverberated through the dark hallways, stirring the dust from its slumber. It was a sound so unexpected, so out of place in the stillness of the night that it seemed to hang in the air long after it had stopped. Nestled in the heart of this secluded abode was our protagonist, a solitary writer living alone, his only companions the characters he breathed life into on paper. As the knock pulled him from the depths of his dream, he sat up, heart pounding against his ribcage like a trapped bird. His eyes, wide and alert, darted around the dimly lit room, the shadows dancing ominously on the walls. The writer was a man of words, not a man of courage. His mind was a labyrinth of stories, each more terrifying than the last, and he knew all too well the horrors that lurked in the dark. Yet he was alone, miles away from the nearest neighbor. The knock was a disruption, an anomaly that didn't belong in his world of solitude and quiet contemplation. The knock came again, louder this time, a presence in the stillness. It was a sound that seemed to seep into the very marrow of his bones, filling him with a dread he couldn't shake. His throat ran dry, and his palms became slick with sweat. He swallowed hard, pushing down the fear that threatened to consume him. With each step towards the door, he could feel his heart echo the chilling knock, a grim symphony of fear and anticipation. The floorboards creaked under his weight, a reluctant accompaniment to his journey. The shadows seemed to pull at him, whispering tales of the unknown, feeding his fear. And with a deep breath he turned the knob and opened the door. What lay beyond, only time would tell. The writer had plunged himself into the pages of his own horror story, and the first chapter had just begun. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more spine-chilling stories. Standing on the threshold was a stranger, drenched and trembling. His eyes, wide with terror, mirrored the flashes of lightning that split the night sky. The writer, taken aback by the sudden intrusion, ushered him in, curiosity piquing at the sight of this unexpected visitor. The stranger, upon entering, cast a wary look over his shoulder as if afraid that whatever horror he'd escaped from might follow him inside. He sank into the offered chair, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as he tried to steady his trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know where else to go." The writer, intrigued, urged him to elaborate. And so the stranger began his tale. He spoke of the gnarled woods that lay just beyond the town's outskirts, of how he'd ventured into their depths, lured by the thrill of the unknown. His voice faltered as he recalled the entity he'd encountered there. A presence that was neither human nor beast, that moved in the shadows and whispered with the rustling leaves. He described the paralyzing fear that had gripped him as the entity drew closer, the chilling dread that had seeped into his bones, the primal instinct to flee that had taken over. His words painted a vivid picture of his terrifying encounter, his voice wavering with the raw emotion of his recollection. The writer listened, captivated by the stranger's tale. His heart pounded in his chest as the stranger recounted his desperate escape, the entity's eerie laughter echoing in his ears long after he'd managed to break free from the woods. "The woods," the stranger warned, his voice barely a whisper, "they're not what they seem." The stranger's tale left the writer with a chilling sensation that lingered long after the stranger had left. His words hung heavy in the air, a foreboding promise of the horrors that lurked in the shadowy depths of the woods. And though the stranger had departed, his tale remained, echoing in the silence of the night. Quiet descended once more, but the writer's peace was shattered. The tranquility of the night was a cruel illusion, a mask worn by the darkness that was slowly creeping into his life. The writer had always been a man of rationale, a seeker of reason in the chaos of life. But the stranger's tale had sowed a seed of uncertainty in his mind, a seed that was now growing into a monstrous tree of fear and paranoia. The once familiar surroundings of his home had turned into an eerie labyrinth of shadows. Odd noises began to puncture the silence of the night, a soft whispering in the wind, a distant clatter, an unexplained creaking of the wooden floorboards. These were sounds that had no source, sounds that seemed to emanate from the very walls of his house. Objects began to disappear, his pen, his glasses, the novel he was writing. One by one they vanished, only to reappear in the most unexpected places. In the refrigerator, under the bed, even inside his old typewriter. It was as if the house itself was playing a cruel game with him. Chilling drafts blew through the house, making the writer shudder. These were not the gentle breezes of summer, but cold gusts that seemed to carry with them a sense of foreboding. the writer would often find himself wrapped in a blanket, teeth chattering, as he tried to ward off the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. The writer began to question his sanity. Was all this real, or was he merely imagining things, his mind playing tricks on him? But as the haunting intensified, the line between reality and imagination began to blur. He could no longer deny the presence of something unnatural in his house. The days turned into a blur of fear and uncertainty. The nights, however, were worse. Each nightfall brought with it a fresh wave of terror, a new chapter in his haunting saga. As the nights grew longer, so did the writer's fear. He knew that he was no longer alone in his house, that he was sharing it with something, or someone, unseen. One night, the terror reached its peak. On this particular night, the writer was not merely a spectator to the horrors that infested his life. He became the protagonist of his own nightmare. The once tranquil whispers of the wind transformed into eerie voices, murmuring tales of dread and despair. The quiet corners of his home, once his sanctuary, were now filled with fleeting shadows, playing tricks on his mind, making him question his sanity. The writer's once mundane world was now enveloped in a cloak of fear, a fear that was not of this world. It was a fear that gnawed at his courage, a fear that whispered tales of the unknown into his ears. On this night, the whispers were louder, the shadows darker, and the presence more pronounced. As the clock struck midnight, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer just whispers. They were screams. Screams of the damned, echoing through the hollow walls of his home. The fleeting shadows now took form, dancing in the dim light of the moon, their grotesque shapes imprinted on the writer's mind. The unseen presence, once a mere figment of his imagination, was now a tangible force. It was as if the entity had finally decided to make its presence known. The suspense was no longer a mere concept. It was a reality, a tangible force that gripped the writer's heart in its icy grasp. The line between reality and imagination blurred as the writer found himself trapped in a world of his own making. But amidst the terror and the suspense, the writer found his courage. He decided to confront the entity, to face the unknown that had turned his world upside down. He stood his ground, refusing to succumb to the terror that had held him captive. The writer's confrontation with the entity was not a physical one. It was a battle of wills, a battle against his own fears. It was a moment of truth, a moment where he had to choose between succumbing to his fears or standing his ground. In the face of the unknown, the writer stood his ground. He chose to fight, to confront the entity, to reclaim his life from the clutches of fear. His decision marked a turning point in his life, a moment that would forever change him. It was a night of terror, but it was also a night of courage, a night where the writer found his strength in the face of the unknown. The dawn brought with it a shocking revelation. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the shroud of darkness, the writer found himself grappling with the aftermath of the night's haunting. The terror that had consumed the night seemed to be swallowed by the morning light, leaving behind a sense of unease that was no less chilling. In the clarity of day, he stumbled upon the truth, a discovery that shook him to his core. The stranger, the unexpected visitor who had spun tales of horror and intrigue, had himself been a victim of the very terror he had spoken of. The stranger had died years ago, lost to the ruthless woods that stood ominously beyond the writer's abode. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized the implications. The stranger was no ordinary man but a ghost, a specter from the past, trapped in the realm of the living. His visitation was not a random occurrence but a desperate plea from the other side, a warning against the cursed woods. The reality of the situation was a bitter pill to swallow. It was as if he had been thrust into his own horror story, one where he was the protagonist, caught in a web of supernatural events beyond his comprehension. The ghostly visitor, the haunting, the night of terror, it was all real. Yet the revelation brought with it a sense of closure. He now understood the source of his fear, the root of the haunting. It was not just the product of his overactive imagination, but a tangible entity that had its roots in the tragic past of the stranger. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the writer found himself alone once more. But this solitude was different. It was a solitude tinged with the knowledge of the unseen, a solitude that would forever echo with the ghostly whispers of his night of terror. And so the writer was left alone once again, haunted forever by his night of terror.